Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on April the 7th. We are now a week into the month of April, and I thought it was time to post the summertime outlook, the tropical season outlook for the Atlantic Basin, and this posting is out there right now at ArcfieldWeather.com. We will go through many of the maps and charts and plots that we have posted out there, and certainly go back and take a look at the ArcfieldWeather.com website for any additional information that we may not go through in this video discussion. Wanted to start off with kind of the bottom line up front, take a look at the executive summary that I have for the tropical season outlook and the summertime outlook. First of all in all, I think it'll end up being a nearly normal tropical season with respect to the number of tropical storms, the number of hurricanes, and the number of majors here. We have some mixed signals, some neutral signals, and all leading me to believe it'll be a relatively normal tropical season in the Atlantic Basin. One of the first things we'll take a look at is sea surface temperature anomalies, places like the tropical Pacific Ocean, whereas last summer we had somewhat of an El Nino in the tropical Pacific Ocean. This year, neutral signal really showing up not only now but forecasted as such over the next few months here. So relatively a neutral signal in the tropical Pacific Ocean. We'll also take a look at what's going on in the Atlantic Ocean. Very interesting pattern here we'll see in the temperatures, the water temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. They have been trending downward since the very beginning of this year, the very beginning of 2025. In fact, just recently, in the last week or so, these water temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean have actually trended into below normal territory, or slightly colder than normal. That is at best a neutral signal for the formation and development of tropical storms this summer in the Atlantic Ocean. Also, there's kind of a stubborn pocket of colder than normal water just off the west coast of Africa, and that too is kind of a deterrent to the development, intensification, whatever, of tropical activity in the Atlantic Ocean. We also will take a look at some comparisons with temperature anomalies across the continental U.S., precipitation anomalies when using analog years. Now, there are 5 years that I believe will end up having quite similar sea surface temperatures as compared with what I expect to see this summer and fall in the Atlantic Ocean, in the Pacific Ocean as well. And one of the signals that really jumps out at me, I wanted to point this out up front also, looks like it could be a potentially very hot and dry summer right in the nation's midsection, all the way from Texas up to the Dakotas. Analog years are pointing in that direction, as are some other features that we'll point out here over the next few minutes. And maybe a wetter than normal summer in the eastern part of the U.S. and normal to slightly below normal temperatures in the eastern part of the nation, whereas the west generally looks like a normal kind of a summer with normal temperatures, normal rainfall amounts, and of course out west that means generally quite dry conditions for the summer season. Well, let's now scroll down a little bit here. Again, this is using the posting that's out there on the ArcfieldWeather.com website at this moment here. So I wanted to go back a year. This is how sea surface temperature anomalies looked about a year ago, and a couple of areas I want to focus in on. First of all, here's the west coast of South America right here. A year ago, let me clear that and draw that again here, about a year ago, and notice largely warmer than normal conditions out across the equator. This is the equator line right here, and this is again a year ago, largely warmer than normal. There's a little bit of a pocket of colder than normal. This was the end of last March in 2024, so keep that in mind here. El Nino conditions going into last summer's tropical season. Also, take a look here in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean here, well above normal temperatures throughout that area as well about a year ago. Now, let's go to the current conditions and take a look, and we'll take a look at the differences in both the tropical Pacific Ocean and that MDR, or main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. And here we go. Here's the west coast of South America. And again, these are the current temperature anomalies. And yes, there is some warmer than normal water in the eastern part of the tropical Pacific Ocean, but out in the central part, below normal. So basically, to me, this is a neutral signal here. And forecast, we'll see in a moment here for the upcoming summer season, relatively neutral as well. So kind of a mixed bag of warmer than normal in the eastern Pacific, colder than normal in the middle or western part of the Pacific Ocean. We're talking about near the equator. Again, this is the line right here. This is the equator right in that particular area. So definitely cooler overall compared to a year ago. Now, I also mentioned the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. Take a look here. Considerably colder than it was a year ago. Now we have a pocket of colder than normal water just off the west coast of Africa. That's right here, the west coast of Africa. And nearly normal across the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. It looks like that will continue. In fact, we'll see in a moment here, there's been a downward trend right from the beginning of the year when temperatures were well above normal in the MDR region of the Atlantic Ocean, now reaching neutral, even slightly below normal conditions throughout this area. And the warmer the water out there, the more favorable it is in general for tropical storm formation and intensification. So when you get down to neutral or even below normal temperatures, that's kind of a negative impact at best, and maybe a neutral impact here. So also the colder than normal water off the west coast of Africa can be a suppressing type of factor as well here. So nothing is screaming out that this is going to be a super active kind of a year. We have neutral signal in the Pacific Ocean and relatively neutral in the Atlantic as well, leading me to believe a nearly normal season here. And in both cases, interestingly, in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean and the main development region, the breeding ground region of the Atlantic Ocean, temperatures are quite cooler than they were 1 year ago. Well, speaking of that temperature drop in terms of the water temperatures of the Atlantic Ocean, this is a very interesting trend that we're seeing here in the main development region, the MDR region, we call it, of the Atlantic Ocean here. This is from all the way back in the beginning of this year. This is January of this year, 2025, and that trend in the water temperature anomalies just down, down, down. And right here, this black line here represents neutral. And now we have just in the last week or two actually slipped into colder than normal or below normal temperatures here in, again, the main breeding ground region of the Atlantic Ocean. So this is certainly not screaming out that this will be a super active year with respect to Atlantic Basin tropical activity. At best, it's giving a neutral signal, maybe a nearly normal signal for the number of tropical storms, the number of hurricanes, etc. So very interesting. We'll continue to follow this trend here, monitor this over the next several weeks here, because again, you don't see this too often, that temperatures drop in such a steady fashion. And again, in the Pacific Ocean, considerably cooler than it was a year ago as well, when we had El Nino or warmer than normal conditions in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. Now it's kind of a mixed bag. Some areas warmer than normal, some areas below normal. But this is a very interesting trend, and now to neutral, even below normal temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. Well, now let's take a look at some of the forecasts for the tropical Pacific Ocean. This is a forecast, a compilation of forecasts from dynamical models, statistical models, all pretty much telling the same story here, that relatively neutral conditions in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean during the upcoming summer season and going into the fall as well. First of all, let's orient ourselves on this kind of a plot here. For the black line in the middle here represents neutral. Anything above that, El Nino. Anything below that, La Nina. And you can see right now at this particular point in time, we're starting off a little bit below neutral here, a little bit in La Nina territory, but the thick red line right here going forward through the summer into the fall represents the dynamical models, the average of those, whereas the green line represents the average of those statistical models. Relatively close, almost identical here in terms of being close to neutral, maybe a tad below neutral here on the La Nina side of things, but anything within 0 to 0.5 in terms of the temperature anomalies is what I call relatively neutral conditions. And we're moving forward here. For example, these are kind of rolling averages over a 3-month time period. This is June, July, August, for example, very close to neutral. By the way, here's the listing of the dynamical models, and here's the listing of the statistical models. Those dynamical models use physical equations to simulate the atmosphere and the ocean, whereas the statistical models generally rely on historical relationships to make predictions. But in this particular, sometimes they're fairly different from each other, but in this particular instance here, very close to each other. And again, certainly a neutral signal showing up here on these particular models here. And there are numerous number of models here going forward. And by the way, this is all the way out to the fall season, for example, October, November, December, slightly below the neutral line here on the La Nina side of things, but generally nearly neutral for the next 6 months or so in the central part of the Pacific equatorial region. Now, I just wanted to show one particular model here. That prior plot was for a compilation of models here. Here's the European seasonal forecast for the sea surface temperature anomalies for the summer period, June, July, and August. Really two areas I want to kind of focus in on. First of all, here is the west coast of South America. Notice that El Nino, La Nina area of the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean right here, generally nearly normal temperatures. Any kind of white here shows up as neutral, basically nearly normal temperatures. You're a little bit below normal, a little bit above normal, but this particular model forecast again is kind of emphasized kind of a neutral signal for the summer season in the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. And in that main development region of the Atlantic Basin right here, this is the Caribbean Sea right here going all the way to the west coast of Africa. Yeah, a little bit above normal, but nothing significant here. Slightly above normal. I'm not even sure if I buy that with that trend going the way it is. I think maybe at best will be neutral here, more like the white area likely to show up here. So, but nonetheless, not all that warm, and certainly cooler than it was a year ago. So again, this is kind of one of the individual models that are kind of saying the same story here. Neutral out of the Pacific Ocean and kind of neutral in terms of the temperature anomalies in that main development region of the Atlantic Basin. Well, now let's take a look at some analog years. These are years that I have looked at in the past that I believe had very similar temperature anomalies both in the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean with respect to what I expect to see over the upcoming summer and fall seasons. There are 5 such analog years that I've come up with here, listed right here: 1970, 2013, 2000, 2011, and 1967, kind of in the order of importance here. And this is the temperature anomaly map from the average of those 5 analog years. And a couple things to really point out here. First of all, I mentioned before, could be a very hot and dry summer from Texas all the way up to North Dakota. That is certainly kind of indicated here by a comparison with those analog years. This is above normal, hotter than normal conditions here, maybe neutral in the middle part of the nation, and hotter again up across the Dakotas all the way out to Montana. This may be underdoing it. It may be, in my opinion, warmer than normal, hotter than normal, all the way up through from Texas to the Dakotas. So kind of signal jumping out, in my opinion, of a very hot and dry summer right across the nation's midsection. We'll take a look at the precipitation anomalies in a moment. Quite a bit cooler than normal across the eastern states. I don't think it'll be quite this cool, but I do believe the eastern U.S. is headed for maybe a normal to slightly below normal temperature pattern for the summer. season here. Maybe not quite this dramatically cool, but I think normal to slightly below normal, and that, by the way, will go along with wetter than normal conditions in the eastern U.S. as well. Out west, I'm kind of leaning towards basically normal in terms of temperatures and precipitation. This has kind of a mixed bag out in the west with warmer than normal up across the northwest and a little bit cooler than normal out across the southwest. Generally, I'm thinking normal conditions out across the western U.S. Now, let's take a look at the precipitation anomaly map. Well, here it is, and again, this is using those 5 analog years, taking the average, in this case, of precipitation anomalies. Again, hot and dry. This is below normal precipitation in those 5 analog years. Dry. Texas up to the Dakotas, and again, one of the signals that is really jumping out at me is the nation's midsection could have a very hot and dry summer. Now, a little bit above normal in terms of wetness across the eastern states and relatively normal out across the western U.S. So again, I'm thinking a little bit wetter than normal in the eastern U.S., maybe normal to slightly below normal temperatures, nearly normal both in terms of temperatures and precipitation out across the western U.S. And again, the nation's midsection, a hot and dry summer season is on the way. Well, one other map I'd like to show, and again, all of these maps are out there on the arcfieldweather.com website, and certainly go back and revisit the text and all these maps if you so desire. This is the drought condition map across the continental U.S. as of about a week or so ago, and this is kind of a concern here that right in that midsection here you go into the latter part of the spring and then the summer with already drier than normal soil moisture conditions here. This is drought conditions, almost severe already. It is severe already in parts of Texas, New Mexico, and basically right across the nation's midsection. We're going into the summer season with a below normal soil moisture, and that is a problem that tends to favor drought and heat wave. Whenever you have a dry soil to begin with, then all the sun's energy can be used during the summer season to heat the lower part of the atmosphere. If there's a lot of moisture in the soil, some of that energy would be used to kind of evaporate that moisture, but going into the summer season is not a good thing when you have below normal soil moisture conditions. And that is in fact what we have right now in the spring, headed towards the summer season. Drier conditions already across much of the nation's midsection. So again, bottom line here is I think we're headed to a very hot and dry summer, Texas up to the Dakotas. Well, let me just wrap up again now, going to the top of that posting here where we have the overview. And again, I think based on what I expect to happen in the Pacific Ocean this summer, in the Atlantic Ocean this summer, basically a nearly normal kind of a season in terms of the number of hurricanes, the number of tropical storms, the number of majors here, and specifically on this analysis, I expect maybe anywhere from 15, 16 or so named storms, certainly give or take a couple here, maybe 7 reaching hurricane status, and perhaps as many as 3 achieving major hurricane status. Now, last year we kind of focused in on the main threat area being the Gulf of Mexico, and I think that shifts a little bit to the east this year, maybe the eastern part of the Gulf and up along the Atlantic seaboard. Certainly the East Coast is vulnerable for a hurricane hit later on this summer season. So let's continue to go through this overview here. Some of the important factors we went over: neutral signal coming from the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. Basically, some areas a little bit below normal temperature-wise, some areas a little bit above normal. Overall, kind of a neutral signal, not a strong La Nina, not a strong El Nino. Also, in the Atlantic, the main development region, very impressive downward trend in those water temperatures since the early part of this year, now having reached neutral territory, even a little bit below normal. That is not a great sign for a lot of tropical activity. It's kind of a neutral signal at best. And also, there's a slight a small area of below normal temperatures just off the west coast of Africa. That also is kind of a suppressing sign for Atlantic Basin tropical activity. Then finally, going to the the continental U.S., hot and dry conditions look likely up across the nation's midsection from Texas all the way up to the Dakotas. It could be potentially a very hot and dry summer in that part of the nation. Now, the eastern U.S. very possibly can have wetter than normal conditions throughout the eastern states, and that in turn will go along with normal to maybe even slightly below normal temperatures. Meanwhile, out across the west, basically a normal kind of a summer season, meaning relatively dry conditions and normal temperatures out across the western states. So that's it for now for ArcfieldWeather.com. We, of course, will continue to monitor all of these factors over the next several weeks, but that's it for the 2025 tropical season and summertime outlook from ArcfieldWeather.com.